Is this the only comment you received?
It is. Well, written anyway.
Okay.
They count more. Put your name on it, show it to everybody. Look at that. I didn't set my notifications. Or link my Facebook page. Or my email address. That's a touch slow.
Well, it is. That's what I said before, the last meeting. It's 4 o'clock. It's called the meeting to order.
All right.
Let the records show that all the commission members are present. Welcome back, Michael. It was a
Thanks, Jim.
short loss, but here you are. Yeah,
Missed exactly 0 meetings.
I know. Amazing how that happens.
I quit. I'm back.
Are there any additions or corrections, changes to the agenda?
No, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed? Motion passes. Agenda is adopted as presented. We have minutes of the previous meeting. Any corrections or changes?
Motion to approve the minutes from last meeting. Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the minutes as presented. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor vote aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes, minutes are accepted. We have 2 public hearings on the schedule. The first is for a request for a variance from Anna and Sarah Hamilton to build a 16-foot wide residential structure on a lot that's 300 square feet less than the required 10,000 square foot minimum lot size requirement, and 25 feet less than the required 120-foot depth. This is at 902 Fifth Avenue West, and there's a map in the packet showing the location. You recall that this is a property that we had rezoned. That wasn't our last meeting, it was the meeting before that.
Yeah, there's just one before that.
Meeting before, from recreation to R1 residential. Yeah. So, do you want to step up, offer anything? Cameras here, you know. You want-
Yeah, you want-
No, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, well, we'll hold off then, and Mike, do you have anything in addition to what we received here?
No, we didn't receive any further comments at City Hall. And unless anybody has any questions about this stuff, because there's a few variances here on the list, which I'd be happy to explain if you'd like, otherwise.
Of course. Guess what? I have questions.
Yeah.
Why do we have a 17-foot minimum? What would be the reason for that?
I can't think of a good one.
I could tell you the reason. It was put in place number of years ago, probably back in the 80s, when there was concern about single-wide mobile homes possibly moving into town. And the council at that time thought that it was appropriate to create a minimum width of 16 feet, which then kind of got you past the single-wide mobile home being placed in town. So,
Is that when they set the 10,000,
Nope, that comes
10,000
from
square feet was,
1971.
that was even earlier than that.
which then goes to my comment from a few meetings ago? Maybe it's time we look at everything, because it seems like there's just no consistency or rationale for what's
Well, I think that
plan.
the rationale for the lot size, of the 10,000 square feet is that it meets the 75 by 120 foot, or 80 by 120 foot requirement. That creates a lot of 10,000 some square feet. And
It's actually 75 by 120, which is not quite 10,000. So-
I thought it was 80.
So
see?
that's why it's not clear to me why we have all these different,
Well, the design of this, I couldn't explain why, but you can see what it creates. If you just sort of look at the development pattern, 8th Avenue and West, for the most part, was done after this zoning was in place. And that's the look and feel that these rules create. I think it's pretty typical suburban style development pattern. And whether that's still relevant or not is a great question. And it certainly makes it more difficult to create affordable housing when you're looking at a situation like this. And if you look at our existing older neighborhoods, there's very little conformation with 10,000 square foot lots.
Yeah.
I want to point out that we've already approved a conditional use permit for Enton Moody's house on 8th Avenue West in the city of Grand Marais. That
and
was
those are undersized.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I think-
should we just tackle the whole thing and we don't have to do this process? I know, just,
Well, I mean,
Raising that question.
it's a good question, Stacy, because I do think that, some of those standards that, were put in place in the 70s and 80s probably are not as applicable today, or at least there's a different thought that might be used, especially in terms of talking about issues of affordability. When you have lots that are kind of remnant lots that are left over, and they're certainly buildable lots, in the sense that you could build and fit a home on there, even meet setback requirements, but they might not meet the 10,000 square foot requirement, they might not meet the width requirement. Why wouldn't we want those lots to be developed with homes? It's not part of this discussion, but I think it's a relevant
so how do we,
conversation.
is it the council that starts that discussion, or does
You
this
can-
board?
You can definitely
But
start that
I-
It's
discussion.
not currently on our agenda, the broad discussion, but you can certainly introduce
I
it at the
think it
next
should
meeting.
be at some future meeting, we should take a
Well,
look at that.
Before the end of this meeting, let's circle back to that and talk
Yeah.
about what that might look like.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So did you have any other questions?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. Anybody else have any
Oh.
questions, thoughts?
We have sewer and water up there, correct?
Correct.
That was put in, the residents up there in Creechville couldn't afford to pay for it, so we got a grant from the IRRB that paid the whole thing for them because it was low-income housing.
Well, then we'll put
So
right-
that's the history of that. I was involved in that, so I remember it very clearly.
That's great. Now,
I mean, I think this is a great way to utilize a lot that exists, that's on city sewer and water, that, otherwise would just sit and not be productive. Yes, these requirements, it doesn't meet the traditional standards that we have in our ordinance, but, I think when we start to talk about trying to make some of these lots buildable, these are the kind of things that come to mind for me, is that we should be trying to utilize these remnant pieces or parts of lots that were, that certainly can be used and can be, creating new housing opportunities. So, I would support it. I think, it's time for us to look at the ordinance too, and think about how these regulations affect affordability and really what we're trying to achieve in terms of, development in the community.
I think you've located a good spot to try and create something affordable. It's on city water and sewer. This lot only misses by a little bit by our current standards. The variances that you're looking for are not controversial, they're not difficult. I don't think there would be community resistance to any of this, and I think you hit on all 5 of the findings here when we read through them, and Tim will read through them, so I'll be supporting it too.
I'll make a motion to approve the request
I'll second it.
as presented.
A motion has been made and seconded to approve the request as presented. In order to approve a variance, there's certain findings need to be made, and there's 5 findings. And the first is that the variance is in harmony with the purpose and intent of the ordinance. And, we just rezoned this property to residential, and so the use of this property for residential purposes, certainly is, following the purpose and intent of the residential district. And the variance is, second finding is the variance is consistent with the comprehensive plan. You know, the comprehensive plan, I think that's a much broader but, document, but the comprehensive plan does, address the issue of affordable housing, and I think that this, does satisfy that. And 3, that the proposal seeks to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the zoning ordinance. Well, it does, the neighboring properties are on, some on similar types of lots, and there are residential uses in there that have been there for a number of years, and, it's certainly reasonable in context of what that neighborhood is. 4, that the plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner. I mean, you didn't create this width of this lot or the depth of the lot. The lot exists kind of as it does, and I think it's, a good use of the property. And last is that the variance, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the locality. And clearly, it's a residential area, even though it's zoned recreation for the most part.
Was zone recreation.
We only rezoned the parcel. We didn't rezone the.
We have some additional work to
We
do.
didn't rezone.
That's
the-
why I think we should,
We didn't rezone
Fix it.
the larger tract of land.
Okay.
So it isn't gonna change the character. In fact, a home in there would, I think, enhance the neighborhood. So, unless anybody wants to add anything else to that? Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the request, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes, so there you are.
thank you.
And this will go to the council next week.
If I understood correctly,
Yeah. Wednesday.
you'll be putting it up for sale? You'll be building it and selling it?
We have, a list of buyers already. It's a matter of which one qualifies and which one doesn't.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
We plan on getting it up, I don't know, before the snow falls this year, but we're sure trying. Or the snow's too deep.
Yeah. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks
We'll be
for,
back for the second
yeah,
part.
thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, the next is a request by David Bernier for a variance from the height requirements of the ordinance to construct a structure on Wisconsin Street. This is on the empty lot that's now located between the Harbor Inn and Java Moose. There's considerable amount of information that was sent out with the application, maps, a letter, kind of a background information.
That was formerly the Ogama Realty with Van and Bev Johnson, who were prominent citizens of Grand Marais, and one of my closest friends was your grandpa, who went to Washington, D.C. with me on the in lieu of taxes, which saved the Cook County millions of dollars and authorized a reappraisal of the BWCA lands every 10 years. And further than that, they gave the senior center away to the senior citizens of this county, and I paid for the improvements of it to put it in use. But they have been great citizens of this county, and their cousin is Lloyd K. Johnson, who you all know what he's done for this county. So you have a great family heritage and background, and I'm familiar with it because I lived through it.
Appreciate that.
It is a public hearing, so we do have, just want to make sure that it gets entered into the record that we have a letter of support from Jeremy Chase, adjacent property owner, owner of the Harbor Inn, and we all have copies of that, so I won't read it,
Yeah.
but, that should be entered into the record. We received no other inquiries or
Well, we see a
Comments?
number of inquiries, yes, but no comments.
No comments, okay. Thank you. Anything,
I talked to the
David?
Java Moose people, and they said they weren't enthusiastically would in favor of it, but they definitely would not oppose it.
David or Tyson, anything that you want to add to what you have already presented here?
The application is pretty thorough, but I was just going to highlight a few points why I think you can grant the variance and leave the why you should to David, although why you can and why you should in my mind. are
Can you
important.
identify yourself for the folks viewing this?
I'm Tyson Smith. I'm the attorney for Berner Properties and David Berner. One of the kind of the perks of being a lawyer, or one of the only lawyers in a small town, is I get to pick and choose my clients a little bit. So if someone comes to me with a project I don't like, I don't think makes sense, I can say no, because we've got other work we can do. This is a project that I like and I can get behind. And part of the reason is why we're here asking for this request is his concern for his neighbors and not wanting to screw up either the Java Moose or the Harbor Inn. I used to work at the Java Moose, so I know the jargon pretty well, so I can understand that. When you go through the 5 criteria that you use to consider whether or not a variance can be granted in Grand Marais, I think probably the most important one here for consideration is the plight of the landowner, which is a short way of saying the uniqueness of the property. I'm sure Mr. Roth can correct me, but if you don't include contiguous parcels, meaning small lots that are several together that are owned by the same person, I think this is the smallest buildable lot in the city. Disagree? If it's not, it's close. And if you add a 2-foot or a foot and a half wide gap on either side to create an airflow passageway so you don't have moisture problems with your adjoining neighbors, now we really are talking about a very small lot. So that presents a challenge for the developer. What Mr. Berner's done is come up with a project that adds retail space on the first floor and I would call it upscale lodging on the second and third floor. And I think that's the kind of project you want to see in town. But he's come up with that plan in part because of how small this lot is. We have variance ordinances because not every lot in the city is the same size, the same shape, and the same dimension, the same area. If it was, we wouldn't need an ordinance because they're different and we have these small little remnant parcels. I think it makes sense for this board to consider projects like this and to help them along, frankly, by approving small requests like this. The second thing I want to talk about is, in my view, the purpose of the height restriction. You want a height restriction so the people behind you can see the lake. We are a beautiful town, we have a beautiful resource, it's Lake Superior, it's the harbor, that's why we want it there. I would say to you, I walked around and I spent time on the Voyager deck. I'm not sure that that's a sin in this particular community, but when you look out at the harbor and you look at where this project is, there's not going to be, I think, an appreciable difference between a 30-foot structure, which is permitted, and a 31-foot 6-inch structure. If you can tell me honestly, sitting up there, that you can see a difference, then I would be impressed. And also, there's just not that many structures given the way that, or lots, the way the property around this lot sits. If you go walk up third or fourth there? Third. If you go walk up Third and then go around the corner past the Roselle's house, there's really not that many structures or homes that are going to see this building in the way of the harbor view that they either have or don't have because of the location of the harbor and the big trees that are in front of it. So when it comes to the concern we have for the neighbors uphill, which I think is important, I don't think this impacts them in a way that's terrible, and I don't think it's much of an impact at all. And that's why, once again, when you're talking about things like the character of the locality, we allow 3-story buildings. This is a 3-story building, it's just a little bit higher. I'd agree with you completely if you walked in here saying, I want to put a 5-story building in there. There's actually case law on this point that you guys should all send it packing, and I wouldn't be here representing him. But we're talking about 18 inches. I think it's a reasonable request, and I'm asking that you guys grant it. I'm telling you that I think you have the ability to do it.
I would like to make a comment on the 18 inches that we're talking about here. If you look across the street to the East Bay Hotel, I was chairman of the Public Utilities Commission. We approved those 2 large air conditioners on the roof, and they're over almost 40 inches in height. We measured them at the time. I thought it was 38 inches. So we have given a variance to this in the past. And then again, I want to make a comment about, he's been very careful about leaving 2 feet on each side of the building, which he didn't have to do. Under the ordinance, he could have built it right up to the wall. And so I think that's quite a consideration. And I would like to ask you, Bob, what's your rough estimate of what that building is going to cost you?
I would say it's probably going to be close to probably $500,000, I would think, given the square footage and the structure.
Well, in that regard, I've been asked, I used to be the county review officer for the Cook County Fund for many, many years when Carol Gretzik was there. And we always considered it was almost 93% of the Cook County is state and federally owned. And 64% of the city of Grand Marais is tax exempt. So what we're doing now with the housing that we've approved, your thing, which is good for the tax base, and the things that Aunt and Moody's doing, and St. Louis County consulted me about reviewing their budget request. So I did, and their budget request levy is right around 4%, and the additional housing that they have had matches that increase. So their 4% is at no increase. And some of the people that are against progress always say it doesn't matter whether you got tax income. Well, you and I both know that's not so. And you need taxable properties in Grand Marais. So I think you should consider that very carefully.
Okay. David, do you have
Well,
anything
yeah,
that you want to?
I want to thank everybody that I had the opportunity to meet with prior to this meeting. I wanted to take an approach to at least give everybody a couple weeks to digest the material, think about it, Then I tried to reach out to everybody. Michael, I apologize, I didn't get an opportunity to meet with you because I didn't see a contact information there, and I figured, well, he probably doesn't want to be bothered, but I think you probably got the letter ahead of time. And but pretty much everybody else had an opportunity to meet with, and I do appreciate that time. I think most people, since I've met with almost everybody, understand that I started out initially with a two-story structure and had the architect design it and built up to the property line, and we were going to do a really nice commercial space on the ground level, because I think City of Grand Marais is really in desperate need of good new commercial space instead of lodging on the ground floor. I think there's been a lot of discussion about that. There's not a lot of people excited about having lodging on the ground floor, Main Street. But so I started out with the right tactics, saying let's put some really nice commercial space on the ground floor, even though it's not near as feasible. But that's the appropriate approach. Then let's go in and put on the second level. Let's go in and put a 2-bedroom, 2.5-bath unit that could function as 2 lodging units, where if all of a sudden one of the lodging units, would have a full kitchen and a living room, and it'd be just a beautiful unit, and the other unit would just be a bedroom and a bath, and that could function solo by itself through the walk-up, with the stairwell. Mm-hmm. So if somebody wanted to rent the whole thing, it functions as 1 2-bedroom, 2.5-bath. But if you wanted to rent them individually, you could do that. And I thought that was, just trying to be real creative and make it a lot more productive, because it's so expensive to build up here. I think everybody realizes that's one of our biggest challenges here, is just so expensive. We really look forward as a family selling that property on 2nd Street for one-roof housing. We spent a good bit of time trying to put that deal together, because we thought, wow, this would be a great opportunity for them to come in and try to help out some of the needs. But anyway, so then when the architect was done, designing it, I wanted to bring in some more consultants for collaboration. So I called Glenn Peterson. I know Glenn, and I called John Armott, a structural engineer, highly respected out of Duluth. Had John come into town. We all got together. We talked. We had 3 or 4 conference calls together, And it was just an overriding concern that you're going to have a gap like this between you and Java, and you're going to have a gap like this between you and Harbor Inn, and that's going to create moisture problems in the future. We really are real concerned about the moisture. And I go, well, I don't want that. I don't want my neighbors to be impacted. You know, whether it's 7, 8 years, 10 years down the road, they start having moisture problems. The only way they're going to get to fix it is to come from the inside, and that's just going to be a catastrophe, you know, from an expense standpoint. So I said, that's not the right thing to do. And I said, so how do we solve that? How do we eliminate that problem? And they said, well, you can shrink the building 4 feet. Now, I already got a pretty small lot. So I said, okay, let's shrink the building 4 feet and let's see what we can salvage out of it. And she said, well, you just lost one of your lodging units. I said, okay, can we put it up in the back toward, you know, the Highway 61, back toward the back? Can we just put that small little 490 square foot unit back there in the back where you come up the stairwell, where it would just walk out onto that second level deck? And so I know this is a little deceiving, you know, the picture, because it almost looks like, oh, that's sitting right up on Wisconsin, but it's not. If you were to be walking down the sidewalk in front of Java, you wouldn't even see it, because, you know, there'd be a deck there. The unit would be more in the back. And so it's not sitting up on there and on Wisconsin. And then I thought, you know, and then that opens up a lot of opportunities too, you know. I thought, well, there's multiple ideas that came from some of the business people I've talked to in town, because I've talked to a lot of people in town, and they're super excited about seeing something like this. And they threw out a lot of different ideas, and one of the thoughts were, you know, you could do so many things, but if you did like even a really nice art gallery in there, where if all of a sudden they were staging an artist coming in from the Twin Cities or something, they were going to do a show for the weekend or whatever, and then if, you know, that artist could stay up on that little unit up on the 3rd level, and then they could do a wine and cheese party or whatever on the 2nd level, you know, deck. You know, there's just multiple things we're trying to do here. And I said, you know, that's excellent. And so anyway, in doing that, you know, we looked at the ceiling heights. That you know, you got to squeeze them as much as we can squeeze them, so that it doesn't damage, in my opinion, the functionality of that unit, because it's so costly to build up here. And if you look at retail space all over the country, I mean all over the country, it doesn't matter. Most retail space is minimum 12 feet, but standard is about 14. And now this isn't retail space that's 40 years old. We're talking new retail space. And retailers demand, when you walk into a building, that you don't have this claustrophobic effect. You got to have those ceilings opened up so that you have some. So I said, well, how low, you know, was I willing to go on that first floor space? And I said, okay, I didn't really want to ever go below 12, but let's take it down to 11. So, you know, we're down to 11 feet, and you could pass that out, but we're down to 11 feet on the first floor. And I mean, I don't want to go an inch lower than that. There's no sense to even build the building for retail. Might as well do lodging or something. But so then on the 2nd level, when you're doing any kind of, you know, upscale, decent lodging space, you're going to put 9-foot ceilings. And so we have 9 foot on the 2nd level, and then we brought it, the 3rd level of that small space in the back, we brought it down to 8'6". And I think we've done a really good job with a lot of collaboration with a lot of consultants to really try to squeeze this space. And I don't know how we can squeeze it anymore, to tell you the truth. And again, it's, in my opinion, variance ordinances all over the country. Every municipality has them. They're there for a reason, and that's so that precedence isn't set. Just if you were to grant an 18-inch variance, that's not setting precedence in any way, fashion, or form. variance ordinances are set to look at things on a case-by-case basis. And so this should be looked at on it, and should stand on its own merit. And what I've tried to do is take care of my neighbors, squeeze my building, and which is a huge sacrifice. And in doing so, squeezing my floor plates, my ceiling heights. And so I am personally, in granting this variance, it does not set any kind of precedence. People just can't come in and go, I want 18 inches. And I think we've done a great job. We spent a lot of time and effort on this. I mean, I can't tell you how many hours I've got invested in trying to make this happen. And I just wish that you would all give it some serious consideration.
How much
Thank you.
cost have the architectural drawings and so forth cost you? at
Well,
this point?
I'm over $15,000 so far because we've had to redesign it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's an expensive process. I mean, just to get to where we are. I mean, just bringing in consultants from Duluth, and it keeps adding up. So.
A couple questions, can you give us the square footage on each of the floors? Do you have that number?
There is the first, and I may have that. The first floor space. Let me see. I may not. The first floor space.
I mean, it's 20 feet wide, but we just don't.
Yeah.
we just
It's
don't
about
know.
1,000. It's about a little less than 1,000, right, a little bit less than 1,000 square feet.
50, 48 feet deep or something?
It's about 50, but the building's 60 feet deep.
60 feet deep.
I mean, the whole
With-
structure.
With the stairway?
With the storage, little storage unit in the back, and the
Yep.
boiler room,
Okay,
and all
yes,
that
yes,
stuff.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
then with the stairway, 70 feet?
No. Well, the building itself is close to 60, and then you've got the stairwell in the back. Yeah.
So we're approximately 70.
Probably.
So, okay. And then the other question I had is with regard to the parking, when we had met, you had talked about, working with, Jeremy at Harbor
Yep,
Inn to
yep.
work on that driveway access
Yep.
and possible shared use
Yep,
of the parking
yep,
area
yep.
to the rear.
Yep.
That's still.
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
configuration.
Jeremy and I get along so well. We've been working together for well over a year trying to. I've spent. That's another thing. I've spent over a year working with MDOT and Minnesota Pollution Control Agency on our rear parking lot. I had to submit a parking lot plan to MDOT showing them where we wanted the driveway cut, and we wanted them to shrink their driveway cut from 33 feet to 30 feet so it didn't impede with some of the parking layouts that we had done. I took about 5 months to get that approved. We got that approved, got that signed off. I've been working with Minnesota Pollution Control Agency off and on for over a year, talking to them about their remediation plan that was in process and about possibly getting this parking lot cleaned up because it's been there for God knows how many years, contaminated. We've got, the monitoring wells sticking out of the ground. They used to have a stripper out there. And I've got a little bit of a petroleum background, so, I could speak the language with them, and I said, hey, guys, it's real simple. It's black and white. You can either leave the stripper out there and the monitoring wells out for another 25 years, or you can just go in there and rip the asphalt up and go and clean it up like you should do it. And the consultant came back with that recommendation, and so we said, great. Come rip the parking lot up. Let's get this clean the soils up, and let's put clean soils back down. So I mean, it's been a process, but so that's something I've been working on for well over a year.
Yeah,
Have we been-
Mike and I were just at a Highway 61 meeting this morning, and one of the things that they were talking about was that remediation plan, and in reality, that whole area is going to be excavated and all those contaminated soils removed all the way from the front door of the, cobblestone building all the way across the road into the parking lot of Harbor Inn. So it's gonna be a pretty significant hole. It's gonna be excavated and
That's
so.
part of the
so-
Highway 61 project.
Part of the Highway six, well,
Yeah,
part of the Highway 61 project because it's the time to remove those soils.
Yeah.
So,
You had
yes.
mentioned there is a driveway plan? Because I haven't seen it. There's nothing here showing me
Well-
what's going on behind the building.
Okay, yeah, and I apologize for not bringing it. I have two designated spots directly behind my building. That's on my property. Okay, and then Jeremy, and I've talked to Mike, I started talking to Mike about a year ago. If you look in the northeast corner of Harbor Inn's property, there's a utility easement there, and that the city has, and it's just fantastic space. It's just sitting there underutilized. And I met with Mike about a year ago, and I said, Mike, what do you think about this? We go in there and maybe allowing us to put pavers in there on that space. We can pick up another 6 spaces on that grass that's sitting there growing. And Mike says, well, I might be able to work with you on that, but if I ever have to go in and dig up the utilities, it's, on your nickel, we just take the pavers up and put them back down. That right there is going to pick up almost 6 more spaces if that's something that, you would consider.
He's talking about a platted alley, so if you take that T alley that goes behind the Gunflint Tavern and between the Heritage Post and Dairy Queen, it continues on to that next block. And right now, so the driveway that they have on Second Avenue is actually lakeside of that alley. That space, there's 14 feet of grass there. We've got a power line in that serves that block and all those people in it.
So at
But
this
we're
time-
probably going to have to dig it up anyway.
At this
so.
time, we don't have any commitment to parking in this plan.
I think you were saying there were.
I've got
there's two.
two.
There's conversations,
Well,
okay.
he's
Yeah,
mentioned
I
it,
have
but it has,
two.
there's
This
no
doesn't wipe out the
drawing.
2 that you currently
Okay.
have?
No, I currently, pursuant to this plan, will have 2
Okay,
dedicated parking spaces in the rear.
okay.
And then Jeremy and I have a cross easement access and maintenance agreement between the two of us, a shared maintenance agreement to share in the maintenance of the whole entire parking lot. That's recorded,
How many residential bedrooms?
just
in
two
this?
two bedrooms.
2 bedrooms.
Any more questions?
I don't know, does anybody else have any questions?
I have a
Stacy.
question. I met with you and really appreciate you answering questions about the project. I have a question about the process. So I'm not against this. I'm wondering, is it appropriate to approve this with conditions? I'm worried about the retail space, not necessarily. You assured me you like that idea. But in case something happens, can we put in there that the retail space has to be used as retail space, not just, well, I'm sorry, I couldn't find somebody to be there?
I think that
Can we
would
put
be
a
a good idea.
minimum days of, for 20 days out of every month that you are renting, you have to have, I hate to set hours, but I'm asking about that process.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could do that, although the ordinance does have the restrictions that
Yes.
lodging uses are not allowed on the first floor.
But are you
But
just worried about it being
I'm
vacant?
worried about being vacant.
I see.
And not that I
You can't-
distrust you. There was no teeth in the ordinance we passed.
We're not done with that yet.
I know.
But, yeah.
But we are approving a conditional use permit under that
So-
has no teeth. I'm wondering, is it
Currently-
appropriate?
Bob, would you have any objection to that?
David.
David,
David, I'm sorry.
you're thinking of my father.
That was your dad, Bob. I knew his dad. He had
Yeah,
a sugar
Bob.
plantation in
No,
Florida.
I'm okay with the variance approval with a condition that if we're gonna give you 18 inches, you need to put commercial space on the ground level. I can't dictate, if somebody goes out of business or anything, but no, that if you're gonna have an 18-inch variance because you say you're gonna put commercial space and you need 11-foot ceiling heights, then build your commercial space. I don't have a problem with that.
I mean, the ordinance that you did pass is relying on the market forces to generate that activity rather than other
Wow.
potential leverage to generate that activity.
And I'm concerned because it could be, depending what price you set for that commercial space, limits your, and I just want to make sure that the market, is reasonable.
Well, I mean, I think-
We
I think,
make sure we have
that-
something in there.
I mean, as a developer, I don't think, David is suggesting that he would build this to not have a tenant in there. And he's gonna have a mortgage, or he's gonna have, someone wants to get some return on
I
this
get that.
investment.
I
You know,
just
to
feel
have
more
empty space there is
comfortable.
not.
What is-
I'm just more comfortable if we just spell it out before we,
But how enforceable
it.
is that? I mean, I'm in agreement with you, but I'm asking, how enforceable is it? And I'm
well,
asking this
we
to
would
Mike.
be.
Yeah, think about not how enforceable is it, but how would you enforce it? The building will be built 5 years from now. There it is. It's taller than we allow, and then he's not using the space the way you wanted him to as a condition. What are our options?
He can't
They're
have
not
lodging
good.
anymore.
There's not a good way to approach that. I mean, could we get some sort of injunction against him using the building for any reason? It does, like, the paths don't lead to good places, and they're really hard for us to do. I don't think you've given yourself a good option there. You really have to. I mean, it doesn't mean it's a bad idea to put the condition in. The condition, at least, it clarifies for everybody what our intentions were right now. But this, the idea that this is a variance and then, rather than a conditional use permit makes this conversation a lot more tricky in the zone right next door. When this zoning was changed from C1, they do allow up to 35 feet with a conditional use permit. And suddenly it's a lot more appropriate to start talking about, well, I would grant you this variance or this additional height given these things, and set up a system where, he has to do certain things. But because it's a physical change to the building, it's so much more appropriate for it to be a variance because it's permanent, and it's going to be hard for you to do anything in the future about it.
Well, I think we have to have some reliance that the market will govern, the fact that it's not gonna sit empty. I mean.
We need to circle back to something that's important here. We've referred to the variance that was granted to the East Bay for their air conditioning units. I think that was my very first planning commission meeting that I came to. I've never seen a variance since for height. Have there been any?
Not in this zone.
Oh,
No.
okay. In that, at that time, it was basically due to climate change that they now found that they needed air conditioners. And so this is machinery on top of a building. They did not set out to intentionally build a building over the 30-foot height limit. They had a design process. They exercised what they needed to do to create what they needed to create. There was no intention set out to build a building over and above the existing height.
Because it was already existing for the last 75 years or 50 years. It doesn't make sense to raise the building.
No, that was a new building at the time.
New buildings, yeah.
The one thing I like about this project is it does not obstruct any view. Very clear, correct?
You had mentioned the 35-foot height limit that's in the Highway 61 zone. Has anyone used it? It's 30 feet limit permitted,
Yes,
5 feet with, as long as it doesn't interfere with anyone's views.
right.
And that goes through a public process. No one's asked for that yet, that I'm aware of.
No one's
ever.
asked for it.
So here's what I want to point out, and I think this is known to the group, but we haven't talked about it yet, is that we have an anti-height culture here in Grand Marais. I know, I've just faced this wrath. And I built my buildings within the 30-foot height limit. People don't like it when you even build a 30. And so now we're talking about going to 31'6". And it's, right out of the chute on a custom designed building that could arguably be designed within the 30-foot height limit, as you and I have discussed. And for all of the reasons that you're doing this, I really support this building. I really love it. And that site's been inactive for so long, my entire time here. That site's been inactive. And I'm just concerned, I don't know that the public is really part of this conversation as much as they should be, considering the importance that height is to them. And that we've never really done this before. We've never really just come out of the chute and said, let's do a height variance. You know, we've had to do it after the fact for East Bay. No one else has ever asked for it. This is important. And it, especially considering my recent experiences, it makes me as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. You know, this is touchy stuff. But
I
now,
don't
would
think,
it-
I would disagree with you.
I disagree with you
I know
wholeheartedly.
you do.
And I don't think you should be bringing that up.
Well, I am.
I tell you right now,
I'm a pro
I have
progress
defended your project, and
know.
I took all the heat. I had 20 people come to my house, and if you want me to list who they were,
Please
yeah,
don't.
they were opposing it.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's
So
not get into that.
aren't they
I
gonna
don't
show up
want to get
this?
into that.
Aren't they going to show up to this? You know?
Well, that's
you
a
know.
question. I mean, they might, you know, but we have responsibility to address the request
Yeah.
that's before us.
I mean, I
and-
do have that same concern, like when I was seeing the height. I mean, and just because it's the height, I mean, but really, it's like, it's not much, but it just the building going up at all is going to be a thing, like even if it's right in 30 foot.
And look, 18 inches.
Oh,
That's what
no,
we're talking about.
Yeah,
And if,
no, I'm with
and
you.
if we don't approve it, he can go ahead and do it without our approval. Because it fits the
30
ordinance.
feet, but, yeah. I mean,
So keep that in mind. If you're gonna stop something of a $500,000 investment for 18 inches, I'm damn opposed to it.
Right.
And I wanna make a motion to approve it right now.
All right, we have a motion. we have
And
a
subject to what your conditions of.
Okay, if you will put that
Absolute-
in it has to have retail space on the bottom floor that is, how do we,
Retail space.
Can we call
Commercial.
it commercial?
Commercial?
Let's call it
not
okay,
retail.
commercial,
I absolutely.
Could be an
will-
office,
I would,
could be.
I would
Well-
endorse
a
that to my
restaurant.
motion.
Not lodging.
Not lodging.
not lodging.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm just saying.
Not logic.
When it gets talked about as commercial, retail, then I
Right.
get nervous about
You're
the
right.
restrictions
Okay,
on.
that's
Okay.
right.
So you
I
were
agree.
seconding that then?
Okay, I've called for a motion. Is there a second?
I will second that.
Thank you.
Motion has been made and seconded.
Any further discussion?
Is there further discussion?
We have a new chairperson.
Are you ready?
See, I was chairman here for so many years, I can't
Are you ready?
get it out of my system. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I run a meeting a little bit different, so. But eventually, it's gonna have to come back to me, so. Yeah. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
The ayes have it. So with
Hey,
that,
what did
we
you vote?
do have to have to
I
make
do
the
think there
findings
was room
required
for-
by the ordinance.
Did you say yes or no? I said
So the
No.
findings that the,
yes.
I heard a yes.
are required.
Thank you.
The variance is in harmony with the purpose and intent of the ordinance. You know, the downtown district does allow 30-foot buildings. The adjacent district allows up to 35-foot buildings under special circumstances. The developer is trying to work with the limitations of the property. I think the thing that strikes me about it is that, you know, he could have done this without a variance had he utilized the full capacity of his lot, but he made some choices to help protect his neighbors from potential, you know, moisture problems, which I think has been a good gesture on your part, and I think doesn't really change in terms of what the building is gonna look like in the downtown area. The variance is consistent with the comprehensive plan. I mean, this is again a harder question to answer, you know, because the plan is so subjective or judgmental, I think, or maybe, you know, I don't know, maybe I need some help with the consistency with the comprehensive plan here and laying that out. Anybody have any thoughts?
Well, one of the things the comprehensive plan talks about in the last paragraph is the concept area design overlay district. And the design of the building certainly fits very well with those things. I'm not sure if that's 100% relevant to the request for a variance, but
That's where I have a harder
Yeah.
time fitting that,
Tim, I can give you one.
go ahead, help me out here.
The downtown development goals to provide shopping services and entertainment core that will meet the needs of tourists and residents. And we are, its policies trying to encourage the development of underutilized areas. This certainly is one. We want to develop downtown before we expand out. We're also encouraging a pedestrian-oriented environment. You want nice-looking upgraded storefronts. This
There
is
you go.
also there as well. I'd go for a while on this one if you want them all, but
No, I mean, we don't have that information in front of us, so that's like, it would have been nice to pull that off, you know,
Right.
but, thank you. 3, that the proposal seeks to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the zoning ordinance, and commercial use of this property in this district is the appropriate use for the property. Development of a new building on that property, is gonna replace a long, existing, tired old building that, is gonna provide much better, and appropriate use to that, location. 4, that the plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner. And again, the narrow width of the lot, creates some of the challenges here, and we're trying to work with the neighboring property owners to protect their properties, as part of that. And then 5, that the variance, will not alter the essential character of the locality. Already adjacent, you have, Harbor Inn building, which is, close to 30 feet tall, and, really, in reality, the view that is gonna be impacted is gonna be relatively, minimal, because of its location. Anybody else have anything to add?
Good.
All right, so this has been recommended for approval, and we'll go to the council next week. There we are.
I do appreciate everybody's time and consideration. I know it's not an easy decision to make, but I do want to just thank everybody for taking everything into consideration with what I'm trying to do.
Do you have a schedule for construction on this
Well, with the Minnesota Pollution Control
project?
possibly ripping everything up, we may have to wait, because of that,
2020.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Under old business, we have a couple items. The first item is the discussion of lodging on the first floor in the downtown waterfront district. Seems like we have already been down this path.
seems familiar somehow.
However, you see the memo from Mike explaining what the council's response was. Council expressed concern that the changes may not fully address the issue that was being considered. And I think that conversation has to do with some of the things that we had talked about, and that,
I'm pretty sure we expressed the same concern.
yeah, the issue was bigger, and in order to expedite moving along this portion of it regarding the lodging, we decided that we would give that information and make that recommendation to the council, and that there's other issues that we had identified that we thought were relevant and needed to be addressed, sometime in the future, and so it's the future.
So I told the council that you fully intended to take this conversation up again. They were satisfied with that. So this is more about letting you know what they said. They kind of agreed with you.
The downtown council, or people of merchants retail downtown, were very pleased with the ordinance. In fact, they were relieved.
So I think the issue, before us is, what do we want to do? I mean, how do we want to, set up some kind of schedule, and what are we asking Mike to bring back for our consideration. You know, when we talked about the issues of parking. Trying to recall, I don't have it right off the top of my head, what the other issues were that we had.
Well, I think one of them was just exactly what Stacy was asking about, which is, okay, he's building a building. She wasn't very confident that market forces alone are enough to guarantee the outcome that we're looking for. And it's that issue of vitality again, that there's actually something going on there, not just a building space, but there's activity that adds to what's
It's
going on.
possible within the ordinance to say that it's specifically not allowed, lodgings on the first floor. That's a possibility within the ordinance, isn't it?
It is, but it doesn't guarantee that something that you want
be used
will
in the way
actually
we
happen.
want
It
Right,
would be
but
a
that-
lobby.
But that's not our issue.
Space.
That's an enforcement issue like we've been faced with before. We're not in the business of enforcement at city planning.
No, I don't
But
think it's
there
an
has-
enforcement issue at all.
Well, I think we should define that we expect, or
Yeah,
part
agreed.
of the lodging is you have to have some sort of space on the bottom that
Right.
is commercial.
Well, you know, and we talked about when we, you know, having this extra conversation was this whole pedestrian kind of storefront interface and what that really, you know, was. And we really couldn't come up with anything that we could put into
Yeah.
words that, you know, would be something that we.
useful or directive or-
And-
Yeah, be something we could incorporate into
And
the ordinance.
Should
Yeah.
it be that this percentage is windows and not wall? I
Well,
mean,
we've
I
got
don't know.
that.
I would like
We're
to
good on that.
I'd like to roll the conversation back just a little bit on a couple of things. One, that's a kind of a complicated discussion that I think we need help on. I think we need input from other places that have dealt with this and how they've dealt with it. And because otherwise we're sitting here throwing percentages out. We know what we're after, but it would be nice not to be inventing the wheel. And I don't know how much of that
And
we've
we're not
actually received.
design professionals to.
Yeah, and what we've been doing throughout this process is we've been slowly enrolling, like we just got the conditional use permit requirement through the council for the first level. It's important to remember this conversation began, I don't know, 6 months ago, asking for a moratorium on all vacation rentals in the downtown zone, if I recall. And that was too extreme, so we're slowly rolling out these things. I can foresee this process working the same way, where we just keep rolling things out and we keep reaching ultimately towards the most complicated goals, which would be like perhaps this one we're talking about right now. The things that I would like to see discussed are parking, because if you're creating a space that's creating additional parking stress and you think you're going to shove it out to our streets where all the retail and restaurant parking is supposed to be, I think we have a problem. And I think that with the right parking language in place, it's absolutely critical that we have that and that we address that and that we make that a criteria. Another thing too that I think probably needs to be in there, whether or not this is a lasting solution or sort of a potentially temporary one like the one we currently have for a conditional use permit process for the first floor, is making it a conditional use permit process for anywhere where it's currently allowed. So that would be anywhere in the downtown zone, first through top floors and the highway zone. Those are the suggestions I'd like to make. As far as parking requirements, I think the parking requirement should be, that's worth discussion, but roughly one per bedroom or one per unit minimum.
Yeah,
I can tell you from experience, if you have a two-bedroom or less, most people will arrive in one car. But it starts to cross the line. If you have a three-bedroom or something like that, you've got two cars coming for sure. And if these cars are parking nonstop, 24/7, in our zones that are meant for people who are coming or going for short-term commercial retail parking, it's damaging to the overall vitality of the town. And so, if someone's going to create a vacation rental, a nightly lodging in the downtown zone, they should really be using a lot of the same criteria that hotels are required to use, which is figure out your parking. Look around, and can someone name a hotel in town that doesn't have adequate parking? Which one?
It's one of the
Shoreline?
biggest, it's one of the
But they have
biggest
a parking
problems
lot.
we have
But
here.
it's not adequate.
Well, maybe it was at the time they built it, but at least they did something.
But yeah,
You know,
no, they park
and,
on
and
the
I don't
street.
know. I'll call them our forefathers. I assume
East Bay's
probably
not
all-
adequate either.
No.
What's that?
East Bay's
East
not
Bay,
nearly
another
adequate.
one.
Right, not adequate. Yeah, exactly. So this is something that anyone who's been on councils and boards long enough with me know I always talk about the parking, and I walk the walk. I just spent more on parking for my units than most people would spend on their house, and so I think this is really critical, really critical. I live it in my neighborhood all the time. So another thing too, I want to point out, as evidenced in our earlier vote, I don't know how long I've been on this board. A couple years? Longer? I don't know.
Probably about 6 now.
Oh, jeez. Really? Okay. We've prided
Probably a couple
ourselves.
years.
We've prided ourselves in giving out unanimous votes. It sends a great message to the council and lets them know, because they know we don't all agree on everything. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to continue to do that in this process. Okay? Because I feel we could have made a lot more progress by this point, and we haven't, because we keep seeking a unanimity before we send something up. And so this might get a little contentious, letting the public know. You know, when people refer to the planning commission this or the planning commission that, we're not of one mind all the time. And I think it's important to point out that we're diverse, and maybe the votes are going to start showing that as we try to move things along a little quicker. You know, when I talk to other members of our local government and members of the community, they're just wondering why we aren't doing enough on this subject. And I just tell them, well, it's a process. We're taking the steps we can. I tried the nuclear option with the moratorium a while ago, and now we've backed up, we've gone forward from there. But times are changing, things are happening right now, and we do need to make progress. And so I just want you to know it's nothing personal or anyone, but I'm going to push a little harder going into this process. So,
Well, and I think that, you know, I mean, you bring up a good point. I mean, we don't all have to be on the same page to move something
Move something
forward.
forward, no.
You know, I mean, in fact, it's not even our decision, it's our recommendation to the council, and the council has to be, you know, at least unanimous in the level of support for any types of changes. But yeah, I mean, I think what we owe it to the public is to have a good, solid conversation about these issues, so that we weigh the facts and try to present the best recommendation we can to the council, and, you know, and let them do their work, and you know.
So could we specifically, if I may jump ahead, talk about parking for a moment? Because I think a properly established parking criteria would really, how should I put this? Really force anyone who's doing this to put a lot more thought into it. Because not everyone has parking available. Not everyone, I don't really believe someone should give up parking they're currently using for employees to do it. I think this has to be newly created parking for newly created lodging space. So it has to be something that you create. So you're not putting any additional stress on our parking problems here. I don't think there's anyone who would say we have enough parking in Grand Marais. I've never met them. Well, you ride your bike. So anyway, that's
Well,
not the experience I get. And so I really do believe that we need to put forward a plan that says, here's our criteria for parking. Create new parking.
I mean, I can agree with you, Todd, in the sense that, you know, when new development occurs, there should be a parking plan that goes along with that, and it should have some reflection on what that business or, you know, use is going to contribute to the parking needs, whether it's for employees, whether it's for you know, clients, guests, you know, visitors, whatever it may be. You know, we know that anything newly added is going to add, you know, additional parking requirements, or at least parking demands. You know, maybe the public parking can handle that, maybe on-street parking can handle it in a way, but I think we should have that conversation, because the standard that's in place now, where there is no requirement for parking for most of the businesses in the downtown area.
There's no land to accommodate them.
Well, there could be. I mean, if the Lang property sold and somebody wanted to build on there, if they wanted to build from edge to edge of that property with a structure, there's nothing to prevent that.
Yeah.
And, you know, should we be requiring them to reserve, you know, parking spaces?
That's
in
not
that
a bad
instance?
idea.
I mean,
It's to me, it's the way it has to be.
Are you saying parking spaces for any business or
Or new
for
construction.
lodging?
Right now, we're talking about lodging. That's all I'm
Okay, so-
talking about.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to stay focused.
But I think
yeah.
we should have this,
All
I
right.
think we should have a broader conversation about it, just because I don't think that lodging should be,
Well,
you know,
here's
exclusive
where-
to that
Here's where we
conversation.
might veer off a little bit, because I want to get this done.
Yeah.
And,
You know,
so-
Lauren Lang used to go around with a big ruler, 36, and a big piece of chalk on the end of it. And he'd go out, he knew who all the employees were, and he'd mark a big thing on their hood of their cars. Employees should not park in front of their businesses. And I think that should be something we should talk about.
There are old 90-minute parking ordinances, I think, still on the books in
Is it?
downtown Grand Marais. I think they're still
I
on the
think there's
books.
still signs.
Yeah.
I see people
Nobody
putting,
checks
I-
it.
I-
Yeah, I see
they-
people putting
they've
up
never- haven't
signs
been
that no one-
enforced,
I don't know where they get them
as
from.
long as I can ever remember.
Yeah.
I've never heard of anybody getting a parking ticket.
So
If you-
anyway,
If you ask the sheriff, if he would even have a book to write a parking ticket.
Not for a
I want
while,
to make sure I
huh?
was clear. I'm only referring to nightly lodgings. If you're going to create them, you need to create parking. And I don't mean you steal it from your employee parking or you steal it from where you used to park. It can't be a cannibalizing of something you already have. That's not helping. You're just pushing that parking out of the street now. And so if you have, just imagine an imaginary property, let's take that empty lot you're referring to. You know, those could be turned into quite a few different units. Obviously, you're going to have to design it in such a way that there's probably parking underneath or parking in the back. But you need, as the owner and investor and developer, to take it upon yourself and your responsibility not to exacerbate our parking problem. You have the option. This is the only time you're going to be able to do it right. And like I said, I walked the walk. That's what I did. And I would expect everyone else to do it.
Well, I mean, I don't think we need to solve that problem tonight, but I think if we want to engage in that conversation, we need to open up that conversation about if we're going to deal with parking in the downtown area. And I wouldn't limit it to just the lodging aspect of it. I would open up the conversation to looking at all aspects of parking in the downtown area. And because why are we asking for an ordinance change if we don't identify what the issue is?
We hardly have this kind of use in downtown, but it's coming. That's why. You know, we have this stress, this threat of this kind of use coming. It's already in existence. And, but you won't see this kind of parking needed for retail establishments. You won't see it for that.
Where do you think all the employees for the establishment are?
They need a place to park.
Well, they do. How's that different from if you have a lodging unit and the people staying there need a place to park?
I'm not saying they aren't needed. They're both needed. But if you already have a property and you're using up all your own personal property, your personal space for employee parking, you're going to need to create more if you're going to build residential units above.
You might have to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
We
Well, I
already
think it is.
require that.
What's that?
We already require
You
that
already require it.
for residential units.
Right, but lodging.
Yeah, so the difference is, when we put that rule in place, there wasn't this idea that we were gonna have residential units that actually took on a commercial lodging characteristic.
Right.
And now it's pretty clear that's all we're gonna have. You
So-
know, we're not gonna have apartments downtown.
Right. Yeah.
So to me, the logic that made it valid then makes it valid now.
I mean, if you're trying to answer Tim's question, why this instead of other things, I think the characteristics of that parking is different than a customer for a retail place. It's not different than an employee necessarily.
Yeah.
But really, have we defined the problem? Have we measured what the issue is and decided that this is how many spaces should be available at any given time? I mean, that they're full is a good sign in my mind, not a bad sign. If we built more parking and now there's plenty of parking on the street all the time, we got too much parking. This is valuable commercial space, and to use what could potentially be valuable tax-paying property for something that's a lot less valuable. Much better to let the private sector make their own determinations about it, in my mind, like Todd did, that for market purposes, he needs to provide that parking because his customers are going to expect it. And
No.
if he doesn't,
I did it for peace in the neighborhood. Pure and simple. My customers do not require covered parking. I live there, and I've had to put up with this. And we've all had to put up with each other, and it's a lot of conflict. It wasn't market determined. There's no sense in what I spent.
okay, well then there's no sense in what he did. Why would anybody else do it?
Because
But
people
the-
care about
that-
people
and
care
they
about
wouldn't, and
what's
that's
best
what's
in the
gonna cause
community.
the problem.
What's best for the community.
So,
What's best
but
for
what
all
is
of
the
us.
problem? Like, if we defined it, if you look at most modern urban planning thought on parking requirements are thought of poorly, because you take valuable property that could be producing tax value, and instead it's producing a lot less.
If you
But
can't get
if
to it.
if you have, like, we're talking that empty lot there again, units there, and 6 units, 6 different cars, and they're parked up.
12.
I'm being generous.
Sure.
And they're parked along Main Street in front of Sievertson's, in front of Svedinoli's, in front of the donut shop, in front of Joins, and they're there for a week.
Yeah.
Guess what? They're not going to move their car.
So,
And
agreed.
they're,
Well, if they don't move their car, they're probably shopping in those stores. I mean, that's a good thing.
no, they're,
the
no,
thing is-
I don't believe
Well, the
that.
argument that Mike's making, I've seen, I've read before. You know, what you're doing is you're putting the onus of parking onto the developer. Now, whatever it is you've created, whether it's retail or residential, you're putting the cost either into housing, additional housing costs if you're creating housing, or you're putting it into retail, all right? Which means they've got to make that much more money to support the cost of constructing their parking. I get that, but I don't think we have a choice. You know, if you're going to have a viable downtown, if you're going to survive, you can't have everyone parked up like you're talking about.
Well, I just want to put some definitions on the terms we're using so that we can explain our disagreement a little easier to people. If you say there's a parking problem and I say there's not, we've gotten absolutely nowhere in having a real conversation about it, right? What is the expectation, the service expectation we want to provide with our public parking? How close should people be able to park to a particular business? How often should they be able to find a space within a certain amount of time? I mean, if we can't really describe that, then how can we say there's a problem? Because we don't know whether we're meeting what we think is reasonable or not.
So maybe the conversation we need to have is, you know, what are our expectations with regard to public parking and with regard to privately owned parking? And
So that's the big picture. Now, if you don't want to go big picture, because that's messy, complicated, and takes a long time, and you just want to deal with, we think lodging is different, we're going to disregard the rest of it. We already require lodging to do parking at 10 units and deal with some of the issues that we've recently observed. I'll point a few out. We don't define unit. The unit, as we understood it in the past, means a hotel room, and that's not how they're being built anymore.
Yeah.
And so when we have I guess we'd call it a 6-unit building that's this,
well, David is
new.
building a unit.
He's
that
calling it
now
a 2-unit.
Now could be 2 units.
Is it 1 or 2? But, I mean, how many people are really going to stay there? And we don't know anymore, and our old rules don't apply very well. And I think that's a great reason to rethink how we set our old rules up around lodging in particular. And so you could look at defining unit better so that you know how many spaces you want to require, and you could also look at the number of units that, our threshold was 10 before. Maybe you don't want it to be 10. Maybe it needs to be 0. Maybe it should be 6 or 2. Or, I mean, those are 2 easy things for you to work on that don't have to take a long time.
Yeah.
The Schultes complained to me constantly about they're being taxed for providing parking for their store. And the same thing is true with the Holiday. They are paying tax on that land, but they have parking spaces available for their customers.
If we had a public
it's-
plan for creating lots of
There's no question that
racks,
parking is a big issue in this town, and now with the Visitors Bureau becoming so active, it's more of an issue than it was 2 years ago. It's very difficult to find a parking place on a busy day around here.
Oh, yeah.
there
And
isn't
the
one.
town was laid out in the early 30s and 40s, and it wasn't. This town was not laid out to handle the amount of traffic that we're handling today.
Yep.
It's just not there,
So-
and that's a broad issue. We could be here for 10 years to
I think there's more
discuss
than,
this.
more than one solution that we're going to need to arrive at right now. I just want to work on the one that's in front of us, the one that's the subject of
Anymore,
public concern.
I gotta get.
So
You
would
know,
you
so
suggest
if we
by
drive-
bed or
Shorter
unit?
conversation.
Right?
We need help back from, I think, Mike. What are common, what do we use as our model? Are we going to use hotel numbers? I don't think so, because these are small units. Hotels would do, I think, a percentage based on, it doesn't apply. All I can say is from my own ma and pa experience, at least or around 1 per bedroom. That's about it.
Well, I mean, I
You
think Mike could do some research for other communities that are somewhat similar in the fact that they have their downtown areas are very tourist-oriented, pedestrian-oriented, and they have lodging activities going on. Big Stillwater and, certainly resort communities out west that, value the pedestrian experience and try to limit the parking, but
Yeah, agreed. And
maximize.
another thing too is, they don't necessarily have to be right there with that building. It can be like wetland, where if you get rid of some, you purchase some somewhere else.
This is
Yeah.
our existing rule, too, that
For
if you
lodging?
build residential,
Yeah.
where we do require you to, that's the only place we require parking downtown unless you're 10-unit hotel.
Can you tell me what is the residential parking rule? If
Yeah.
someone creates a home above Severson's, sorry, to just brought that out, and it doesn't have to be Severson's, should we pick something else?
No, that'd be great.
You know,
That's a lovely spot for a home.
Above the donut shop.
Above the donut
We looked at that.
God.
It wasn't in the.
Just give me a dumbwaiter. I'm just gonna bring them right up there.
That's fine. The parking
Out of the
requirement.
Didn't think
door.
anybody wanted to live above the door.
You didn't want to live above the donut shop, yeah. Well, you don't smell it anymore when you work there, so, yeah.
You
What's wrong with smelling it? It's
You don't smell
donuts.
it, no.
Yeah.
Do you remember the Oda? East African restaurant.
Can't have
on
one
West Bank.
It's hard to deal with it.
Yeah, I used to work above
That's a
there.
good point.
Oh, man. Like at first, yeah,
Mm.
smelled it all the time, and then after a while, you're just like, yeah, not really. Not there.
Forever, for life? You can't smell cilantro?
Oh,
or
no,
something?
now I
Okay.
go back for
Okay.
sure, but still, it's like at the time, it's like, oh, this is so good, oh, this is so gross, I don't even smell it now.
My gut feeling is 2 unit, 1 bedroom, 1 parking space. 2 bedrooms, 2 parking spaces. 3 bedrooms, still just 2 parking spaces, because most of those groups will arrive in 2 cars.
So we
After
we
that,
require
Sure, we'll have some kids.
1 space per residential unit within 150 feet of the property.
And no limitation on bedrooms in that unit?
No discussion of bedrooms at
Okay.
all. So
Well,
I don't even know if we
I think it's
define
important
unit.
that we recognize that our goal is to not add
How old
additional
is-
parking stress.
How old do you think that?
That language is 10 years old.
That's 10 years old.
Yeah.
It's not too bad. I'm just saying from my experience, this is what I've seen.
So what
This
did
is
you
And we don't
built
define
parking, what
unit.
did you
I built 1 per bedroom.
One?
I actually built more than 1 per bedroom. 5 bedrooms, I built 6 spaces. And, because I, personally, you can never have enough parking. You know, but also, it was very seriously about peace in the valley there. You know, we have parking wars,
Well,
you know.
in order to kind of move this along, if we want to see some, might bring something back to our next meeting, and if you want to just limit the scope of this, so you can act on it. I mean, I would like to see probably a larger conversation about parking in general, but I
Perhaps
can.
we roll it out just like we've been rolling
I-
this out.
I can agree with the fact that if you want to address the lodging portion of it,
Mm-hmm.
with recognition that we'll have a more thorough discussion about whether there is a parking issue and what that might, if there is, what it might constitute, and what our expectations might be if we were trying to do something. I would be willing to put on the agenda that we consider parking and requirements for lodging.
Yeah.
in the
Agreed.
downtown
I don't want to create an environment where people are now rushing to create their vacation rentals because there's going to be a parking requirement coming and they won't satisfy it. Is there anything anyone can recommend in the short term? This is where the last time we floated out moratorium. No one likes moratoriums. No one likes them. So, you know, what do we do in the short term here?
Move quickly.
Yeah, okay. Do we need a motion to say we will put this on the agenda? Not really.
Well, I would, I think if we just instruct Mike to bring
Okay.
back information for our next meeting, we
Okay.
can start that process.
Okay.
If he brings back some
Yeah.
And I don't want to.
examples from other communities that might have similar situations.
That'd be awesome. Also, I don't want to keep us here all night. We all got places to go, but I did mention at the very beginning, I'm in favor of an idea of the conditional use permit process for any vacation rental. I went through it. Everyone who's in this main floor zone is going to go through it. The places that are currently not covered by this language are any place above the first floor and anyone on the Highway 61 zone. And I don't see why we don't require it for everywhere, and I'm open to discussion on this. I think everyone would like to know if there's some sort of criteria or process that people go through.
I agree with you.
You had mentioned it a long time ago, that's where I first got the idea. You kind of shocked me. I said, really? Seems extreme, and now I'm in agreement. Sorry.
Extreme, I'm in.
Well, no, as this process unfolds, some things become apparent.
Yeah.
And so, I think another way about, an important thing about that process
Babysitting, don't you?
is
I
it
think they're all
gives,
gone home by now.
it gives us the chance
Yes.
to be involved in this ongoing development concept. So let's say we're working on something that's very important to us, like parking, and another request comes along. If we have the conditional use permit process in place, we have some control over that process. You know, without flat out saying no,
Right.
You know, we can say, listen, this is what we're heading towards on parking. Will you do that? Thank you. You know,
Yeah, I
so-
just, question, what we would accomplish with a conditional use process, and what our criteria would be to either approve or deny a, vacation rental, single unit.
Well, why do we currently
Property.
have it in these other places?
Well, we
Not
don't.
playing gotcha. I'm just,
We
that's
don't,
good there.
we just have, we're not calling it vacation rental, we call it lodging less than X number of, and because it's in a mixed-use district, I think it does make a difference. The mixed-use district is kind of a unique area in that you have residential uses, commercial uses, other types of activities going on side by side. The downtown district is a commercial district, and I
In
don't see-
downtown, everyone's closer together. It would seem to me that it would be more needed downtown. A good example, I'll just bring this up. Recently, a development was created that has a certain feature in their yard that is creating an impact on the neighbor next door. If there had been a conditional use permit process, there could have been discussion about that feature. I'm being deliberately vague because I really like everyone that's involved in this. But I'm just saying, we can help with this process. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't get in the way.
Well, I'm not certain that we can necessarily help. We can interject our opinions, but I'm not sure that provides any.
Well, it gives the neighbors a chance to speak.
Yeah, I think the neighbors speak to each other.
And by the way,
you know.
I'm not a big fan of conditional use permit processes. I think you've seen me argue against these.
Well, I just
So-
think that there's little grounds to deny a conditional use request if it's something that we've identified as a use that would be allowed in that district, as a conditional use. I mean, we'd have to have some reason for not allowing it.
That's
And-
right.
But that's why I want make sure that we allow this use, but it has to have this. And I want to make sure that language is, we have parking, that we make sure there's commercial space in that space, and that we account for that.
I mean, I think we're saying that we're not allowing the lodging on the main floor. We're talking
We're
about.
not actually
But-
saying that.
No.
Not saying that yet. We're saying it has to be a conditional use permit process. That's all we've said officially. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't said
So
it's
that's
forbidden.
why,
Well,
we
but-
passed it, but it wasn't perfect.
I don't
and
think
we
it's what
need to
everybody
work on
wants.
it.
I think
Yeah,
people
we
want it
need
to be
work
much
on it.
stronger.
Yeah.
I think we're addressing. gonna
Here's
try
where
to
we may not
address the
have
issue of
unanimous
parking.
agreement.
And that's okay, I think.
Yeah.
Well, you
Good
did-
for discussion.
You did talk a lot about the reasons behind that. Like, before you said, let's make it a conditional use permit, you talked about the issues it created, you talked about the conflicts, you talked about the purpose. All that feeds into the conversation when somebody would ask for a conditional use permit. You've set the table for it with what your criteria are. I think that'd be even more useful, that before you start making it a conditional use permit other places, that you formalize the game, right? What are the criteria? What do you care about? And then you don't have to be so concerned about, what you're interjecting into the process. You've made it very clear what you're injecting into the process.
Yeah.
Well,
how it
that's a
should work,
challenge in
but-
itself to create performance standards that, you review for a particular application and make sure that they meet that. And, I remember back when, bed and breakfasts were incorporated into the ordinance, and there were performance standards that were created to review a bed and breakfast request, because, what do you use as a criteria to, approve or deny those applications, other than, well, maybe if the neighbor showed up and opposed it, you'd vote against it, or if the neighbor showed up and said, I don't mind it, fine, you approved it then.
Yeah, I'm going to say this about the conditional use permit process that we've approved for the main floor isn't, I think, anything we actually want. I think it's something that it's a wimpy little step that we got through. Everyone recognizes it as weak, and we want more. But we do have a measure of control now over what's going to happen on those first floors. Number two, this by me presenting this idea of asking for a conditional use permit process for anywhere where we might create lodging, I'm going for the same process. I don't think this is a permanent solution. I think this is a way of gaining that same measure of control as we work our way deeper into this conversation and get this done right. And so this would be an ordinance alteration again, if we asked for this. Now, my choice at this point is ask for a motion for it, or to say we can discuss it more. I'm going to make the motion. that we ask for, that we go for the same variance discussion, or conditional use permit requirement for any nightly lodging in our commercial zones where they are approved. Any commercial zone. I just want to see where things are at with this. I'm making the motion.
You're making a motion to call for an amendment to the ordinance,
To make all the,
all lodging
Okay.
uses a conditional use in any zone,
in
in any
No.
zone district.
Currently, we don't have any language regarding lodging requirements at all, do we? Someone wants to build a big hotel in town, what's the requirement?
we have a lot of requirements.
Okay, I'm not wanting to touch that. I'm wanting to stay strictly within the creation of nightly lodgings within, small scale. This is all I'm talking about, what we're experiencing right now.
So do we need to change from the 10 bed to 0 bed? Is
Well,
that?
No, that wouldn't be.
I'm getting confused.
Yeah,
Well, I just hit
the
the same
requirements
language.
about a larger building add a lot of requirements that wouldn't work well.
Let's just
with a
use whatever the
smaller building.
language is that's, say, for example, in my zone. Just apply it.
Well, how about this, Todd? I mean, I don't know if anybody's got a second to that motion, but just.
I don't think we know what we're motioning on yet.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what I'm
that's
kind of
the
waiting
problem.
for.
That,
I think there's some enthusiasm.
that if we suggest that you bring back to our next meeting language, first of all, our existing language, and then language that we could then try to work with in terms of creating what you're talking about, because I'm still not certain what we're really amending or changing in the ordinance to.
So, yeah, so can you just say it real clear?
Sure.
Right,
Do,
okay,
Mike,
you
do we
want-
have the language that is used, for example, in the multi-use zone?
Yes, we do.
And all we have to do is apply it to all of C1, the
So-
core, and the highway zone.
We call for small-scale lodging in the mixed-use zone as a conditional use permit. So we just move it from permitted principal uses to conditional uses. Whereas in the Highway 61 corridor, we say lodging is a permitted principal use. So there's two differences in how we treat that, and I think it would relate to any of the zones. One is we either call it lodging or we're more specific when we call it small-scale lodging, which means that 10 units or less. And the other is, it's either in the permitted principal uses list or it's in the conditional use permit list. So if what you're saying is you don't want to change anything about bigger buildings, then you could say anytime lodging is in the permitted principal uses, we specify that to mean more than 10 units, and we add to the conditional uses small-scale lodging.
Small-scale lodging is anything less than 10.
Is 10 and less.
And keep in mind, guys,
But we don't still define what that unit is
Not very well.
yeah.
but
I mean, I think this is
But-
the problem of just making kind of a change like that, is that the implications to what we have already in the ordinance, sometimes we have unintended consequences of,
Yep.
not adjusting for what.
Yeah, and I think that's why we have to put these things in motion so that it's real. And I'm not doing this because I love to curtail business or anything like that. I'm doing this because I'm hearing this all the time from people, and now I want to put it to the test. I want to see how much the community really believes in what they're saying, what I'm hearing all the time, at all levels. And so, so I've made this motion. I want the language that we have in the multi-use zone to apply, move it out of permitted into conditional use, small scale, and I'm sorry, I can't be more specific because I don't have it memorized.
I think that's probably good enough. Do people have kind of a general idea what he's talking about?
And you're saying, bring it back to the next meeting so that we can have full consideration of that, or
Yeah,
you're just saying make that change and
Make the motion. Yeah,
and
I
send
made
it
the
to,
motion.
send it to the council?
Send it to the
So you
council.
can't, you gotta have a public
that-
hearing about it at some
Okay,
point.
what am I making a motion for exactly then?
I don't know. So let's
think-
talk about the fastest way that this could happen, because I think that's what you're trying to do.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Everybody could say, we understand enough of what you mean. We trust you, staff, to come up with an actual draft ordinance that says that, and we want you to schedule a public hearing for our next regular meeting, where we will consider it.
I don't think we have enough understanding of how that change affects the broader ordinance. And I would really like to see it come back to to the commission with the language, you know, and
I think we should
Fully
just do it and do our homework. Let's read this, so we know.
but we don't
Let's
have,
do
we don't
it.
have, we don't have it
want
in
to
front of
have
us,
that.
so.
That's
What's the
right.
difference?
That's what
You're-
I'm saying, have Mike bring it back to us so that for our next meeting, we can then decide how we want to proceed with that, and then the following meeting,
Isn't that what you just said?
Nope. The difference of what Tim's talking about and what I said was an intermediary step where you make sure you like it before you ask the public to comment on it. So you get a chance to look at the language, to study it, to think about it, to decide if there are any other effects that you didn't intend, that it actually accomplishes what you wanted it to accomplish, and then you go ask the public to comment on it.
I mean, I don't want to have to defend what we're proposing to do if it's not something that we really understood that we were
In neither of
proposing
these
to do.
I don't think
circumstances is a motion
we could come
necessary.
to a conclusion. It's a Pandora's box.
If you want to schedule a public hearing, I think a motion is
I
appropriate.
agree with the chairman, what he said.
If you just wanted me to bring you a draft to look at and talk about next meeting, got
Yes.
it. I can do that.
Versus a special meeting.
That's another option if you want to do that.
I'm getting tired. This quicker step that you're referring to.
Is
Hang in there,
just
Val.
ask, you get a public hearing next month,
Right.
but you're going to have a little faith that I understood what you meant.
No, let's go with what Tim's saying.
Okay. And that it accomplishes what you wanted it to.
Yeah. No, I've
And
been
I think this is better.
Yeah, agreed.
I agree too.
Okay.
So
And it doesn't require a motion.
it
So I
doesn't-
retract whatever motion I was or wasn't
You're
making.
making a recommendation that we all seem to agree on, that Mike should bring that language back to us so we can consider it for,
Yeah, and then maybe
Yes.
at that point, we kick it
Okay.
up the ladder to the council as an ordinance.
Robert's
Adjustment.
Rules of Order, I call for a question.
but it's not even a motion.
He
so we
withdrew
don't-
his motion.
There is no
We're going to do
motion,
it.
so.
It's gone.
Stacy, did you have
So,
something?
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure my two hot topics are now
I've
in
got
motion.
both of your
So,
two hot
okay,
topics
that's what I
as
wanna
bring
make
back
sure
to the next
parking is
meeting.
coming at the same
Yeah.
time, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, we're not
All right.
putting one ahead of the other, this is simultaneous.
All right.
Okay, so,
And I'm done, so you
you're
guys.
you're done?
No, yeah, I've got nothing more to add, so go ahead.
Wait a minute.
I'm good. Let me say something then. You know, because we, you know, when we talked about the stuff with Anna, you know, about this issue of the lot size requirements and lot width and all this other business, I mean, I think that these are relevant issues too that we need to bring back and have a conversation about, you know, I mean, there's not a lot that needs to be done other than to get that, have that information in front of us while we're discussing it, just, you know, the dimensional table and that, so that if there are issues that we have with regard to, you know, the ability to build on lots and the density and the lot size requirements, we should be having that.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I think so.
Do you think we need to change it? I mean, I know it's not working, but we've had people bring things to us and we approve them, and
But should they really have to go through the process
Okay.
and delay getting
Well,
started on a project because they've got to wait for two boards to say,
Okay.
oh, that's okay.
Well, and I've questioned for a number of years the fact that there are areas in the city that have sewer and water service to them, and we're requiring them to have 80-foot wide lots. I mean, could they get by with a 65-foot wide lot if they, you know, I mean, sewer and water service is expensive. If we expand any sewer and water service in the community, I mean, you're guaranteed you're only gonna have X number of lots on that particular block. And the cost, I mean, we're talking about affordability. I mean, it doesn't prevent somebody from buying a larger parcel of land and building on a larger lot, but it would also give you an option of buying a smaller lot. And we see in the rest of the city where lot sizes vary from 25 feet to, you know, whatever people want, and, you know,
This is your most powerful tool to address affordable housing, right here.
Agreed.
And I think we need to do it.
So now on the flip side, you've had a conversation about this that went the other way recently when you had all the neighbors show up on the 4th Avenue project and tell you they didn't like the idea that there was going to be that much density. And that much density wasn't very much density.
Yeah.
What we're talking about here is probably a lot more dense than that to make affordability effective, to make that investment in sewer cost effective. So it's a complicated discussion, and I think you're going to need a lot of time and resources to do it well.
but I think without getting it on an agenda to start the conversation, we're gonna be here a year later and not have done anything with
Right.
it. And
Yeah.
I've been
What I
thinking
would
about it.
advocate for, different than what you're asking for, is that you make a plan to actually spend some resources studying the issue and come back with a lot more information than just what our rules are, but look at what our current conditions look like, look at what other potential solutions look like,
Yeah.
and I'm also going to advocate that we find somebody else to do that, because this is
Yeah.
going to be. I mean,
consultant?
there's a lot of frustration that I hear expressed about how fast things move, and part of that is due to just the process is designed that way, but part of it is due to we don't have resources that are dedicated to planning and
Do you mean a
zoning.
consultant?
Yeah, I do. So
This would be an affordable housing consultant or someone who helps
just
rezone
any
and
planning
redevelop?
consultant could do this. It wouldn't be that. I mean, we could have ARDC look at it. We could have.
Yeah.
There's a lot of resources that could help us with it. It would just be a recognition that if we want to move faster on some of these particularly big, complicated issues, we probably need to get some assistance to do that.
Okay. So how do we start that going? Do we ask the council to do that, or can you do that, or how does that?
I think, yeah, if you want to say to the council, hey, this is something we want to prioritize, I mean, the other part of it is you need to prioritize it, meaning, okay, we're going to get some other resources to spend on it, but you need to spend your own time on it too. We can't spend it on everything.
What is
So-
the sentence that we would be passing on to the council? What is it that we're saying that we want them to prioritize on? What is the
Well, that
sentence?
you're prioritizing,
Yeah.
you want to review how the zoning ordinances relate to affordability of housing.
With regard to lot size?
Lot
I mean,
size and
particularly
den-
lot size and
density.
dimensions.
Density.
And that you want to make sure that that's a thorough, because it's a complicated issue, it's very important, and there's a lot of differences of opinion on it, that you want to make sure you do it right, so you want to bring in some assistance to do
And,
it.
and most of those standards were created back in the 70s and 80s as well.
And I'm sure we borrowed them whole cloth from something that was created in the 50s, you know? So it's, yeah, how is it relevant to what we want anymore today? I don't think it is.
No.
So,
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's no motion needed for that, is there?
is everybody shaking their head, that's a good idea?
I think that we could entertain a motion to make that recommendation to the council. I think that would be
Yeah.
appropriate.
absolutely.
Are we recommending the hiring of a counselor? I'm not sure what the counselor is even
We're-
needed for in this.
Well,
We're
we
suggesting
need
that there's a
help.
priority that.
Yeah.
And that they empower us to
Right.
pursue.
To look at this, and
Seek
that the
help.
staff resources probably are not.
I'll make that
Not
motion.
adequate
I'll second.
Motion
I'll
has
third it.
been made and seconded. Any further discussion?
We're probably going to have to do an intermediary step, sorry, because we don't have a budget or a scope or any of that stuff, and it needs to be developed.
Okay.
All those in favor of the motion, vote aye.
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 Opposed? One more
Oh,
item.
that's
Oh, yeah.
The Creechville,
That's right. That's
issue
right,
of
yes.
the remaining portion of that tract of land. Can we start that process?
Well, wouldn't that be part of that process?
No.
I mean, if-
No.
okay.
No, the
We're just
rezone-
talking about
The
rezoning.
rezoning
If
is-
we rezone all those lots, they're all developed, so they're not going to come back and ask for variances, but they're not dimensionally correct,
Right.
so.
But they're also not, they're not allowed uses in
Yeah.
the.
We can start that
recreation
process.
district. So that's the reason why we did the other rezoning. I think we should start that process to correct that
Yeah.
issue, so. And then the last issue, Patrick has public engagement strategy,
Well, let me set the table for this before I
Yeah.
let Patrick talk about it.
I didn't understand it.
What we're trying to do here is describe what we do and how we do it, and sort of understand when it's appropriate to delve deeper into our engagement with the public and when we don't need to. And so to kind of start that thought process, the first thing we did was just inventory how we currently are engaging with the public and try to categorize it. So I'll let Patrick talk a little bit about that.
So, the category, coming up with the categories, I just fished around for ideas on the web, and Mike pointed me in some directions, and found these categories: telling, asking, discussing, and deciding. And then to create this chart, I just kind of asked around the office for people to fill in blanks. And once we had some data, then we were able to put it in this curve and kind of move the more intensive engagements to the top, so you could focus on those and
And we added a few things.
yeah. So I suppose that's what I have to present, other than I have a few examples of each type of engagement, but I suppose unless you had questions specifically about them, I don't know where to jump into those.
So the categories are arbitrary, right? But they're
Is-
well thought out. Someone's actually studied this issue. Many people have actually studied this issue.
What are we gaining from this conversation? Sort of educating us here?
Yep, because there's been some concerns, particularly addressed from this board, about how our engagement's done. And the organization's brought in resources to work on this issue in particular. And so this is a conversation that we want to develop with the Planning Commission to talk about engagement in general, but we also want to make sure that as we're developing a kind of a more formal plan of how we're doing this, that it meets your expectations. So we're trying to, let's educate everybody about this, and if this is the language that works for people, then this is how we're going to be addressing the issue. And then also, this is pretty informative, I think, about what our strategy is right now. Most of the time when we engage with the public, we're just telling them stuff. We don't need them to acknowledge it. We don't know if they saw it. Most of the time when we're doing that, it's appropriate. But you know what? Sometimes it doesn't satisfy. Like, we tell them there's a public hearing. We're inviting them to a discussion, but they don't come. So there's the disconnect. We occasionally ask for feedback. We've done some survey work, for instance, I think, where we're asking for some ideas on things. And that's one step beyond telling, but we're still not back and forth. It's just that kind of a one-touch, ask for some information and move on. That rarely we get to the point where we're actually engaging the public in a much more thorough, some of the greater visioning things that we've done, for instance. We want them to come and sit at the table with us and think about this stuff. And we don't know about deciding it. We haven't decided ourselves whether we want to keep it on the list, because we don't think we do it very often. Historical sites is something that some of our staff people brought up to us as deciding when we ask them where it fits on the list, and then when we asked them to explain themselves, they couldn't. So,
I wondered about that.
I mean, the idea is, and most engagement studies look at it going a step beyond collaboration and actually empowering the public to do things. And I actually believe we do a lot of that, but we don't necessarily need to be involved in it anymore. If the public is just doing things without us doing things, then is there even a role for government in that part? It happens so rarely that it's probably not worth our time to spend a lot on it. So now we're talking about this difference between telling, asking, and discussing. And as we build a strategy to deal with, say, for instance, housing and our zoning changes, we're going to have to decide where that fits on this criteria, on this strategy. Are we just going to tell people about most of the activities that we do? Are we going to ask people occasionally about their opinions about density issues, or show them some pictures and see which ones they like? Are we going to actually bring in a group of the public to help us think about this? Even more pointedly, let's look at, we want to pass an ordinance about parking downtown. Well, we already did ask people quite a bit about that. Are we going to ask them again? Or what's our strategy? And then when we think about it in these terms, it really points out the flaws in our existing legal required notice systems, where what we wanted was for people to tell us things, so we're asking them, or what we wanted was people to discuss issues with us, but it didn't happen. And it's because all we did was put a notice in the newspaper that nobody saw.
Or if they saw it, they, said
It
that.
didn't spark any interest in it. They didn't
register
see
with them.
why they should be involved in
Yeah.
it, or they didn't feel like they would be listened to, or for whatever reason they just didn't engage in it at all.
So as we try to expand this engagement process,
Yeah.
I think we also need to look at the additional resources that requires. I mean, more meetings, more staff time, more commitment to making that process be a valid process, you know. The easiest is to put the notice in the paper, you do it, you know, it's out there, so if they read it, they have the opportunity to come before somebody and give their views or opinions.
Yeah,
Doesn't manifest itself in much.
not much.
You know, pretty easy to do, but you meet a technical legal requirement, but does it meet the objectives of really trying to understand
Are we-
what people's
Yeah.
opinions
Are we, in this conversation here tonight, are we trying to come up with alternatives for the way we interact with the public? Or
No,
just
we don't
talking
need
about
you to do that
vocabulary?
yet. This is just table setting, and language that we can agree to use. So, you know, we will try to do more of that brainstorming and developing of strategies. But what we'll want to ask you each time it's an issue is, where are we at?
Okay.
You
We
know?
kind of started doing that with the city's pedestrian plan when we went out and tried to personally engage people to give us their opinions about where they think it's important to be able to walk to in the community. And, you know, we had, I don't know, 75 responses, or was it?
600?
600 responses,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah. 75 comments or something.
Yeah.
600 pins on a board. So
That's asking, right?
That's
We're
asking.
asking people for information.
That's
They
asking.
gave it to
And
us.
so it takes it a step beyond just telling them that here's an opportunity, you know, come and tell us what you think, you know. Now we're asking them, and, you know, even the other processes that have gone beyond that, you know, are much more time consuming and demand a lot more sources even then.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
But it depends on what our objectives are.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a lot more telling than we've done also. Because I think maybe another category that we didn't put on here was not telling. And we do a lot of that too, where things just happen and we don't mention it and nobody really, most of the time, it's not a big deal, nobody cares. But we're trying to build up that ability to talk to the public about what's going on. And maybe then there will be some interest sparked, and we can, when we ask, we'll get some responses for folks. And one of the ways that that's happening is we've built ourselves a YouTube channel. You know, Patrick, and our first, what I think is kind of the introductory, the sticky YouTube video on what is this channel is out there, worth looking at. It just kind of explains, this is what we're doing here, and this is how you use it. And it's already populated with a lot of information because we've been videoing our meetings for quite some time now, and that we have a record of those. So if people want to see what's going on, it's available for them to engage in that.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add to it, or?
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
We are adjourned.
We are adjourned. Well, look.
One thing about the Creechville, when I had to get that, David Dill said, prove to me they can't afford it. So I went over and asked them all what their incomes were, and they said, none of your damn business. So I said, okay,